So let's come to the story then of 1993's Jurassic Park, directed by Steven Spielberg, screenplay by Michael Crichton and David Koepp, based on Crichton's novel, Jurassic Park, and with a cast including Sam Neill, Laura Dern, Jeff Goldblum, Richard Attenborough, Bob Peck, Martin Ferrero, B.D. Wong, Samuel L. Jackson, Wayne Knight, Joseph Mazzello, and Ariana Richards, film shot by Dean Cundy, whose name is also going to come up throughout the telling of this story. So, I mean, let's do some context because it's quite important. I mean, we look at Steven Spielberg now as rightly a storied director who's achieved that rarest of things, huge critical success, huge commercial success. But his career was in an interesting place in the late 1980s, early 1990s. I mean, he was bouncing around a little bit. In the second half of the 80s, he'd done more dramatic films. I mean, uncharitably, people were saying the chasing awards films as well. He'd done stuff like The Colour Purple, Empire of the Sun, interesting movies, and a real departure from what he was doing before, and also what people expected of him as well. At the end of the 80s, two different projects that kind of summed up the place where his head was as well. He had a huge success with Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade on the commercial side, but also he did a much smaller drama by the name of Always that never really took off and gave him a bit of a box office thump, if anything. He would move on to the Peter Pan story in Hook, what would happen if Peter Pan grew up. And that's an interesting film that I know lots of people have a lot of affection for Hook. I think John Williams' score to Hook is sublime. But as Spielberg himself told Mark Kermode and Simon Mayo in an interview on their radio show, it's a film one day he'll go back and look at to see if he can find anything he likes in it. It wasn't one of the movies that he made he was most impressed with. If anything, the one he was least impressed with. Now, separately, it was in 1990 that novelist Michael Crichton was about to enjoy a big success. Now, Michael Crichton, we lost him a while ago now, at a ridiculously young age, had this twofold career, really. On the one hand, he was directing films. I mean, Westworld is Michael Crichton, but he'd done stuff like Looker. Runaway is a really interesting genre film. The Great Train Robbery, which is that's Sean Connery and Donald Sutherland. He'd done Physical Evidence as well, but also he was a novelist, and he'd done the novel of Congo, for instance, in the 1970s. That had been sold for movie adaptation, and then Crichton had just watched this just live in development hell for ages, and the idea of bringing Congo to the screen, and boy, what a film was it when it did make it to the screen. I'm Hunting for the Ancient City of Zinj. I love Congo, could go on about it for a while, but when Congo did make it to the screen, I mean, it had taken over around 2 decades to do so. He had no intention with his new novel, Jurassic Park, due for publication in 1990, of going through a similar process. And so, with the manuscript out, with Hollywood circling it, this was just before the book itself was published. There were inevitably movie offers going around. But what Crichton wanted to do was make sure that the film would actually get made. And as such, his agents at Creative Artists Agency, CAA, very powerful agency in the late 80s, early 90s, were suggesting don't go for the traditional auction. Instead, put a fixed price on this of $1.5 million for the screen rights to it, but lean towards the offer that will get the film actually made. Try and get some kind of commitment that this isn't just going to sit on a desk or be a memo or something that's pushed around for decades. Let's just find a way of getting it moving fast. So, as it turned out, CAA had 4 studios, 4 companies really, involved in wanting to buy the book, and each had directors interested as well. So Universal, first and foremost, had a relationship with Steven Spielberg. His Amblin Entertainment Company was set up at Universal at this point, and so Universal wanted to buy Jurassic Park for Steven Spielberg. Columbia TriStar, interestingly, wanted to buy it for Richard Donner, who, I mean, traditionally a Warner Brothers director, films like The Goonies movies, the Lethal Weapon movies, Maverick, stuff like that. But Columbia TriStar wanted Jurassic Park to be a Richard Donner project. I mean, high-profile directors. In comes 20th Century Fox, who wanted Joe Dante, he of the Gremlins films, to direct the film. And then Warner Brothers was trying to buy it for Tim Burton. Now, it's unclear how interested each director was, although Joe Dante certainly talked about the film that he would have made. I've not really seen much from Burton and the late Richard Donner. But it was in May 1990 that Universal prevailed, with Michael Crichton not just getting $1.5 million for the book, but also trousering a further $500,000 to do the first draft of the screenplay, which he was a little bit reluctant to do, but still. $500,000 would persuade me to do many things, including writing a first draft of a screenplay. Michael Crichton agreed the deal, and this was now set up as a Spielberg project in the spring of 1990. This was before Spielberg started Hook as well. And so there was a plan at one stage to get Jurassic Park moving faster, but I'll come to that in a second. The deal was struck with Spielberg and Universal just before James Cameron swooped in. This was James Cameron between 1989's The Abyss and 1991's Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Cameron said he's gone on record saying he would have made a much harsher, scarier film, and he couldn't have done the more family-friendly one that Spielberg made in the end. But that notwithstanding, he was never really in contention for it. It was just too late. So David Koepp did his first, Michael Crichton did his first pass of the script, and then other writers came in. So Malia Scotch-Marmot, she's not listed on the credits of Jurassic Park. It isn't really given an awful lot of credit in conjunction with the script of the film, but she worked on this for a while. She came up with a variant on Crichton's script that didn't really pass too much muster with Steven Spielberg, but she would stay attached to the project even as David Koepp came aboard to do another pass on the script. And it was between these three writers, it'd be Crichton and Koepp who would ultimately get credit, but it would be three of them really, Koepp, Crichton and Malia Scotch-Marmot, I'll say her name again just so she gets the recognition, who would fashion the ultimate screenplay for Jurassic Park, which would go pretty much up to the wire. Spielberg films don't have a reputation for being rewritten during production or anything like that. So the script, as I understand it, was locked at the point that they started rolling cameras. That notwithstanding, I mean, they pushed it a little bit fine. Now, it became clear while the script was being written, in fact, it became clear as soon as you just look at the concept of the book, that this was going to be a technical challenge and a half, and a film that needed a fair amount of time to prepare. Contextually, again, if you look at where we were in terms of visual effects in May of 1990 when the deal was done, well, the groundbreaker was the aforementioned James Cameron's The Abyss, which had done stunning work with visual effects at this stage, but we were still like a year off from Terminator 2. And so it was far from a given that the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park could be realistically realized, because ultimately that was what was going to sell the film. And so, I mean, the early production work that was going on, I mean, there was an awful lot of design work, and Spielberg, because it was going to take so much time, jumped more towards Hook while development on Jurassic Park kept going, including what these dinosaurs are going to look like, how we're going to make them. Some of the development team as well, they had to down tools for a while because they were then pulled onto a different project going on at Universal. That would be Robert Zemeckis' Death Becomes Her, now a cult favorite. I mean, it's easy to forget just what a flop that was considered around the time it was released. At the point I'm recording this, the musical of Death Becomes Her has just been nominated for loads of awards in America as well. And then Spielberg was also mulling something he hadn't done at this point, but would do a couple of times again in his career, the idea of doing two films back to back. So he had in mind a long-cherished adaptation of Thomas Keneally's book, Schindler's Ark, which would be the screenplay for which, written by Steven Zalian, would become Schindler's List. Now, Schindler's List was originally a Martin Scorsese project, but he traded it with Spielberg for Cape Fear, I think it was. And so Spielberg was looking at, could he shoot these films back to back? Could he go from filming Jurassic Park in 1992 to being on set for Schindler's List in the same year? And that was where his development work was going. He wanted to set Schindler's List up at Universal, and the deal was struck there. I mean, it wasn't a difficult deal, I don't think, that if he did Jurassic Park, then sure, they would back Schindler's List as well. And it's worth noting that Schindler's List, even though it's not really quoted in such terms, and rightly and understandably so, would be a commercial success for Universal too. It would get 2 hit movies off the back of this, as well as one of the most revered films in its catalogue and several Oscars too. Now, with all the money being spent on the effects, on the physical production and design of the film, the key attraction was going to be the dinosaurs. And so what Spielberg wasn't particularly inclined to do was get big name actors in. I mean, where do you want to spend your money? This film was already going to cost around $65 million to make, which is not a huge amount of money when you consider it. But at this point, again, let's put it in context. Die Hard 2 in 1990 had cost $75 million and led the Hollywood trade press to question, can a film that costs that much ever make its money back? Here we were, I mean, by the time it came out in 1993, Terminator 2 had long been released, more expensive, made a fortune, but there was still some degree of uncertainty in that. So the dinosaurs as the star attraction. And so some of the actors who were considered, people like Tim Robbins, who worked with Spielberg on War of the Worlds, Richard Dreyfuss has already worked with him on Close Encounters, of course. An offer went out to the late William Hurt in early 1992, and he turned that down. I remember Harrison Ford's name being thrown in for a while, but that didn't really get anywhere. And so it was Sam Neill, who, I mean, proved to be a very smart choice, who would land one of the lead roles. Laura Dern would land the other. There's one more crucial piece of casting coming as well. Other names in the mix and who would auditioned or put their name forward or been considered, people like Helen Hunt, Gwyneth Paltrow, Jim Carrey, Robin Wright. And the cast came together fairly late in the day. There were auditions for the young performers, as you would expect, and it was Ariana Richards, who is brilliant in the film, and Joseph Mazzello, who would go on to work with Richard Attenborough on the film Shadowlands, which Attenborough, I'm coming to him shortly, would direct after Jurassic Park. They would get the young lead roles in it. Mazzello had been in the running for Hook, as it happens, but it was Jurassic Park was the role that he got. And then Samuel L. Jackson was cast off the back of Spike Lee's brilliant movie, Jungle Fever. Richard Attenborough was almost the wild card, really, because I mean, an Oscar director of the Best Picture Oscar-winning Gandhi, more known for his directorial work at this stage. He hadn't acted for 15 years or so when he was approached to play John Hammond in Jurassic Park. I mean, initially he told Steven Spielberg, "I'll do it for pretty much free if you give me a tight." I think he asked for 0.01% of the film's gross, and Spielberg just said, or 0.1%. Spielberg just said to him, "There's no points on this. You've got to do it for a flat fee." But I mean, he signed on the dotted line, and then Jeff Goldblum auditioned, and he was fairly promptly cast just after that. So on the one hand, you've got the screenwriting, the casting work going on, and then there's the effects work. There is a brilliant series on Disney Plus called Light and Magic, the second season of which has just landed. But the first season, Light and Magic, is a show that tells the story of the visual effects powerhouse Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, as we've come to know them. And in Light and Magic, it charts the storied history of ILM, but also, in parallel with that, how effects work was changing away from practical, more towards digital. And so, it was ILM that was charged with putting these dinosaurs on screen. And the initial idea was, let's do it the old-fashioned way. And if you go into the Light and Magic TV show, I think it's episode 5 or 6, you see some of the stop framework that was being done, that was being supervised by Phil Tippett, an expert in physical effects. Stan Winston was another expert in this field, was building the creatures themselves. But unbeknownst to anyone, unbeknownst to most on the Jurassic Park project, a computer animator by the name of Steve Williams had got other ideas, and he was convinced you could do the dinosaurs digitally and you'd have more flexibility in doing it. Now, Williams had worked on Terminator 2, which had broken a lot of ground in visual effects. He'd worked on The Abyss as well, and he just wanted to see, could he take this a step further? And so on the side, this wasn't a prime directive, as it were, from ILM, but on the side, he built a skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus Rex within a computer, and then he animated it in wireframe wireframe form on a computer, and then demonstrated this within Industrial Light and Magic. And it was a mic drop moment. At the point that was seen, I mean, you look at turning points in cinema, and certainly in visual and physical effects in cinema, that was one when the Jurassic Park crew looked at this, and all of a sudden, like, the shift, it's almost overnight that it was decided, right, we're going to do the dinosaurs this way. Not exclusively that way, which I'll come to shortly, but I mean, Phil Tippett was just he was devastated. It came out with the line, "I've just become extinct," which is a great line, and Spielberg, I think, wrote it into the film. It was written into the film off the back of that. And Tippett still worked on the movie, and he was still overseeing parts of the animation and the look and the movement, and made sure that this still looked realistic. And amongst the film's Oscars, there was one for him as well. Meanwhile, Jack Horner was one of the consultants on the look of the dinosaurs, and they broke significantly with reality. There are umpteen articles on the internet about how the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park aren't actually looking like proper dinosaurs. But Spielberg knew that he was making a blockbuster movie as well. He knew what he needed these dinosaurs to do. And in fact, I remember an interview around the time the film was released in 1993, where he said what he wanted to do was, for 45 minutes, give people basically an education on all of this, and then for 75 minutes, put them on a roller coaster ride. And so with that template in mind, he was just like, he was putting the film together and distorting reality as and when he needed to do so. He also talked in that interview, I remember the day the film came out in the UK, or a week before, that BBC One put on prime time on a Friday night a documentary called Spielberg and the Dinosaurs. And he talked about how he didn't want to ground his camera, that if he was putting dinosaurs on screen, he needed to be able to treat them as characters. He needed to move in and out. And you see that in moments in the movie as well. And so the demands from him as a filmmaker had to be met by what ILM was coming up with. And of course, history tells that they delivered, but there were a lot of unknowns, and there were a lot of cliff edges, really. And against this, the script rewrite work, remember, was still coming in. The final script came in quite late as well, and Crichton would discover that it deviated quite a lot from his original draft, and it deviates quite a lot from the novel as well. We're at the point here where we're a month or two from the release of Jurassic World Rebirth at the point I'm recording this. And even now there's talk of we're going back to unused moments from the original novel, which left a fair amount behind. Filming would begin in August of 1992. And I mean, a lot of pre-production work had been done. And there were a lot of challenges here. I mean, location, there were weather challenges, for instance. I mean, famously, a hurricane on the last day of one part of the location shoot would blow away the set. I spoke to Dean Cundy, the cinematographer, in 2008, I spoke to him, and I talked to him about just like all the little small camera nudges and bits and bobs in Jurassic Park, about all these little tricks that they employed to make it look authentic. And he said to me, one of the aspects of the film language or grammar that the audience has sort of been taught over a period of time is that certain little camera movements or compositions or things like that all have a particular kind of meaning or potential meaning as far as visual storytelling. And he just said to me, it's a lot of fun to examine that vocabulary. And he says, you might say, okay, how can I apply just a little bit of a dolly move here to accentuate it, or to keep the audience a little bit unsettled, or whatever you're trying to do. I asked him what the most complex bits to do were, and there's a sequence in Jurassic Park that takes place in a kitchen, and on the plus side, it's on a soundstage and it's an interior. On the other, so many shiny surfaces. Cundy told me that when we walked into that set as it was being built, and I looked and saw that everywhere there was steel. I mean, the challenge just presented itself to him. He then said, also, it's brushed stainless steel, which is particularly difficult because it reflects light and things in all directions. So we were constantly devising ways to hide the things that shouldn't be seen, like lights and so forth, and yet create surfaces that the animators and compositors could put reflections in so that the illusion of reality was followed through with. Because just in that kitchen sequence, as well as the digital visual effects, there were puppets that were being used in that as well. There's so much pathfinding, so much of a step into the unknown. There was, I've written about this, and it came out of the Light and Magic documentary that there's an argument that the most effective visual effect in 1993's Jurassic Park, and it was used in the trailer, it was used in the promo, and in terms of building up tension, it's quite something, is a glass of water on the dashboard of a car, and the water ripples as we hear a footstep outside. Now, this was an idea that came from Spielberg himself. For all like the visual effects ingenuity and the headline grabbers, it was this small moment. And he was driving around playing his music a little bit too loud. He popped on a few tunes by Earth, Wind and Fire on his in-car stereo. And he noticed that the heavy bass of that music was having an impact in the car, that things were vibrating. No, not like that. And so that was his eureka moment. And so when the dinosaur was thumping towards the car in Jurassic Park, if there was a glass of water with circular ripples, that would denote that something was approaching. And so he took it to a guy called Michael Lantieri at ILM. How on earth do you do it? Because it's a fairly, on the surface, simple practical effect, only, of course, it wasn't. And it was solved quite late in the day because Lantieri then got on the phone to sound engineers. How on earth do you do this? And they tried a various bunch of approaches and couldn't replicate the effect that Spielberg wanted on set. They tried wave tank generators. That didn't work. They used some of the technology you find in a fish tank. That didn't work. But it was kind of the night before they were due to shoot this moment when they went back to music, that was where they got the solution. So Lantieri got his guitar out and started playing and just experimenting with a glass of water nearby. And he put the glass on the guitar itself and plucked a string. And he got the necessary vibration and ripple in the water. So how then do you transfer that, now Spielberg had wanted, to an effect for the film? So there's a little bit of work to do. When he rocked up at work the next day, they had to rig the car. So there was not going to be computer graphics in here. And what they did is they ran guitar strings through the car, put the water in position. One person then had to lie on the floor of the car and be that day's chosen plucker. He plucked the strings, the water rippled, Spielberg got his shot. There are loads of practical moments in Jurassic Park. I think in the end, someone calculated there's like 6 minutes of CG you see on screen, but it dominates a lot of the conversation about it. There's a lot more of dinosaurs, although not as much as you think. But it's quite something that it's the tiny moments that in their own way are resonating. Now, Richard Attenborough's novel, not his novel, his memoir, which he penned with Diana Hawkins, there's some interesting stuff there on Jurassic Park as well about being, he was on the verge of 70 at that point, and it's the first time he'd been part of someone's cast for over a decade. And he was nervous. I mean, in his memoir, Richard Attenborough, of all people, nervous. And so he parked up outside Stage 24 at Universal Studios, where all the set work was underway, to meet with Spielberg. But Spielberg was running late. And so Attenborough was waiting. And to quote the book, Dick was surprised to find himself confronted by an elderly prop man bearing a vast array of spectacles. And they came with a message. Apologising for his tardiness, Spielberg was suggesting that while he waited, Sir Richard might like to choose the eyeglasses he considered most in keeping with his character. Well then, the character of John Hammond, at first Attenborough, was a glasses wearer, and he wanted to keep the heavy tortoiseshell frames, which had become quite his visual trademark. Then, as the book describes, he began to experiment with the different styles on offer, and he became excited. This nervous, all of a sudden a nervous actor, became excited at the prospect of reinventing himself and in the process regaining, here's the phrase, some of his long lost anonymity. So he went through various extremes, and then he plumped for professional thin gold rimmed glasses. And then there's another knock at the door, and again it's not Spielberg, it was a young assistant director bearing an abject apology. Still unavoidably detained was Steven Spielberg, but this assistant director was asking Sir Richard Attenborough to select the flavour of ice cream that John Hammond would eat in a scene in the film. And so we brought 3 large tubs of Ben & Jerry and Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Other ice creams are available. If Ben & Jerry's want to sponsor this podcast, you fill your boots, get in touch. I'll take all your money and your ice cream. Attenborough was impressed by the attention to detail, and apparently ice cream, one of his secret vices. So he munched through the chocolate chip cookie dough. He liked that. He had a pint of it. Then he moved on to the super fudge chunk. And then he shared the remainder with Diana Hawkins, who was writing his book with him. And as the book describes, returning half an hour later and seeing all 3 tubs scraped clean, the tandem-toned assistant managed to conceal his amazement as he shepherded us into a waiting golf buggy. And so Attenborough went to meet Spielberg over at the Amblin headquarters on the far side of the Universal lot. The filming on Jurassic Park was complete on the 30th of November 1992, just as its big rival for the following summer's box office was preparing its teaser trailer. This was the return of Arnold Schwarzenegger to the movies for the first time since his biggest ever hit, Terminator 2 Judgment Day. And a 2-year absence from Schwarzenegger on the big screen was to end with 1993's last action hero, The Big Ticket. And this was the rivalry. I mean, they were positioned 2 weeks apart, and it was Schwarzenegger versus the dinosaurs was a lot of the conversation in the build-up to that summer's movies. Who would win this battle? As it would happen, when it came to it, Universal held back some of its advertising as well to go directly against Last Action Hero when they realized that Jurassic Park was going better than planned. But I'll come to that shortly. So while ILM was doing its post-production work, the Universal was starting work on its merchandise. The merchandise for Jurassic Park, I mean, call it what you like, but it's pretty cynical, is on sale in the film. There is a sequence where you see it all and then go off to the shop and buy it. And so, but Spielberg wasn't there he certainly wasn't physically there through a lot of the post-production of the film, that he was doing a lot of it via video link work, because he was straight off to Krakow for the production of Schindler's List. And so, I mean, again, Richard Attenborough talked about this in his memoir, about how 2 weeks before shooting on Jurassic Park, it describes in his book, Spielberg's whole attention was focused on a completely different project. It's famously known that George Lucas came in to help with the edit of Jurassic Park while Spielberg was away as well. But then it became the build up to the release. And I mean, you look at the marketing of the way Jurassic Park was promoted, and the decision was made to hold back the dinosaurs and hold them back and hold them back. I mean, as a teaser trailer campaign, it was incredible, really. I mean, certainly at the time, it was generating a lot of excitement. The first teaser came out in December 1992, and people were talking about that teaser, not the Last Action Hero one. And I mean, just gave you very, very tiny glimpses of what you were going to get. This pretty perfect tagline, an adventure 65 million years in the making. And, you know, a huge marketing spend. And it got to a point where the film was due for its premiere on June the 9th, 1993, ahead of its release in the US on June the 11th, 1993. That was a month or so before we got it in the UK as well. And I mean, the anticipation for this was growing I mean, the hype was at the level really of Batman, I think. Batman 1989, for those of you who lived through that. Now, the summer of 1993 had got off to a good start as well, with Cliffhanger giving Sylvester Stallone a comeback hit as well. The build up to Jurassic Park, though, was substantive. I mean, really, it was the case that it was pretty much everywhere. John Williams had done the score. I should note that as well. It's also worth noting as well that Michael Kahn was editing the film while it was shooting, that again, so that Spielberg could meet his demands, these deadlines and demands for Schindler's List 2. It went in front of critics, and the critical reception to the film was really strong. I mean, just a theme park ride. I mean, pretty much what you were promised was what you got. And also respect for the fact that the scale of the dinosaurs and how much had been held back too, that it is the film that Spielberg set out, the 45-minute education, and then 75-minute roller coaster ride from that point. And the movie then opened that weekend, June the 11th to the 13th, 1993, with Universal pocketing $50 million opening weekend. A record breaker. The record had been held by Batman Returns the year before. Jurassic Park came in and very happily helped itself to a lot of money. It was number one in its opening weekend by a lot, 47 million against Cliffhanger with 7 million. I mean, other films around at this point, Made in America was a solid hit for Whoopi Goldberg that year. That was in third. Guilty as Sin, Dave, one of Ivan Reitman's most charming films, Menace to Society, Life with Mikey, Hot Shots Part 2, Sliver, and the original Super Mario Brothers movie rounded out the top 10. The other films that opened just on in terms of counter programming, light release, were What's Love Got to Do with It? The Tina Turner Story was just on a handful of screens. Orlando, Russell Crowe's breakthrough, and Romper Stomper as well got a release that week. But it was when the second week on release was when Last Action Hero was coming out. And so Universal had held back some of its marketing spend from its own opening weekend because it sort of knew the job was done, and just positioned it in the US to take Last Action Hero out the week after. The reviews of Last Action Hero certainly didn't help, but Jurassic Park's second weekend was 38.4 million. Last Action Hero crashed with 15.3. I like Last Action Hero, a really bold film with problems, but at that point, at the point it was green lit, that the thought of an Arnold Schwarzenegger film being trounced by a dinosaur special effects film was just an absolute non-starter. You go on to week 3. What's number one? It's Jurassic Park, another 27 million. Sleepless in Seattle opens in second place. Good counter programming with 17 million. Dennis the Menace opens in third place with 9 million. It was called Dennis in the UK because of a copyright clash over characters called Dennis the Menace as well. And so Jurassic Park just rumbled on for much of the summer. In the US, it didn't quite topple E.T. numbers, but it was one of the biggest films ever at the US box office at this point, $357 million gross. Outside of the US, it was a sensation, $621 million for a worldwide take of $978 million. And now there's been several re-releases. Of course, there've been a whole bunch of sequels as well. And there were Oscars as well. That the film took home 3 Academy Awards for its sound effects editing, for its sound, and for its visual effects at the same ceremony that Spielberg's Schindler's List took 7 Academy Awards. Spielberg films had 10 films, 10 gongs at the 1994 Oscars. Universal wasn't done, though, because it then put a huge... imagine this, an era where you have to wait over a year to be able to buy the film to watch it at home. That's where we were, folks. And it was in October 1994 that Universal spent $65 million promoting the home video to buy release of the film. That's the budget of the film to promote the video. It made a bomb as well at that point, of course. There were all sorts of legal cases as well. Let's tread delicately here, chums. The adult entertainment industry had a little bit of a habit, so my mates tell me, of taking popular films and putting adult spins on them. So A League of Their Own became A League of Their Moans. Famously, I think it was Saving Private Ryan became Shaving Rise anyway. And then there was 1 or 2 Jurassic films that took how do I dance around this? Not easily. Took the title Jurassic Park and made it Jurassic something else. Universal, though, sued. And really defended its ground here to the point where I didn't know this. It set up a hotline where people could report and grass up illegal uses of the word Jurassic in their products. So the zoo in America that was Jurassic Jungle, well, they were threatened with legal action. It had to become Dinosaur Jungle. This word Jurassic was basically ring-fenced by Universal lawyers. All those ice cream vans that drive around with Disney characters on it. If you saw one with the Jurassic thing, you could ring the hotline and grass up this tiny business and stuff like that. It was there were all all sorts of lawsuits floating around. Interesting though, Spielberg, when he reflects on Jurassic Park, he doesn't call it one of his favorite films. I think he gave an interview a few years ago where he said it's not in his top 10. But again, at the point we're talking here, the 7th film in the series is being released. He would come back to direct, of course, the second one, The Lost World Jurassic Park. But then as he again admitted, he sort of lost interest directing that roughly halfway through it and kind of bundled his way through and then went on to the other stuff. But I mean, in terms of the pantheon and the oeuvre, if you like, of Steven Spielberg movies, few are held with such affection as Jurassic Park. And I think few have made such the impact on blockbuster cinema. And I say that, I mean, you go through his 80s stuff, of course, E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, they rightly stand up there at the top. Jaws in the 70s. But Jurassic Park is in that conversation, isn't it? And it was parodied. It was, it was the film that other studios made, and tellingly it was a Columbia Pictures which backed Last Action Hero. In a Premiere article, they summed it up perfectly when they said in a Premiere article called How They Built the Bomb, which was written about Last Action Hero, why didn't we just buy that dinosaur book?